The world is old and the powers are weary. The god at the door of night has fallen, and the great enemy of the world has come back from the timeless void. The shadow has awakened the great evils to regain dominion over Ardar. Darkness shall cover the land, if not with the deeds of a small fellowship of elf friends. Join the players of this Dungeons & Dragons campaign as they fulfill the events of the Dark or Daggeroth prophecy and strive with Morgoth on the plains of Valinor. Welcome to the Undying Lands in Part 3 of the Inglorion Bastards trilogy, Trials of the Valar.
Alright, welcome everybody to episode 122 of the Inglorion Bastards campaign. It's not really just a campaign anymore, it's a podcast. So, in fact, there's been 121 episodes before this one. So, I should introduce it such. But with me tonight, I'm very honored to have Dr. Vicki Ronn with me. She is the professor of English at Friends University, all the way over in Kansas. And I asked her to come tonight because one of the things that she does is she's the awards administrator for the Mythopoeic Society. And over the course of the last 2 years, while interviewing people like Verlin Flieger and Michael Trout and Dimitra Fimi, we've mentioned the Mythopoeic Society and the awards given from that society many times. And I wanted Dr. Ronn to come talk to us tonight about the society and about the awards that are given out, so it could give us some context. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Ronn.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Well, let's get to know you a little bit. Could you just anything that I missed, which I'm sure it was like a 2-line description. I missed a lot. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of how you came about, on your path to the fantastic?
Well, when I was teaching, and I was a high school English teacher for 14 years before I went back to get my doctorate. And one year we were creating a class called Women with a Pen, which was supposed to be all women writers, all women main characters in the short stories that we were going to teach. And a colleague and I looked through it and we thought, oh, here's some great role models for young women, and here's some great characters that are middle-aged women. But when it came to old women, wow, were they not very positive? And so we started thinking about how are old women portrayed, and mostly they're portrayed as witches or nags or fools. And so we got an email, which never happens at high school, by the way. You never get like a call for papers for a conference in high school. But we got one, and we sent one in. It was accepted, and we were going to Cambridge, England the next year. So we had to write the paper. And when we did that, we wrote a paper about it. We went to Cambridge, we presented it, and I decided I wanted to go back to get my doctorate. I thought, I really want to do this. I want to research more. So when I went to Texas Tech University to get my doctorate, I knew the moment I walked in the door that I was going to write about old women, and I was going to write about fantasy, because I've always loved fantasy, Tolkien especially. I think I read Tolkien the same year the Silmarillion came out, because I remember asking for it for my birthday. and I still have that copy. So yeah. And then when you become a professor, then you get to go to conferences, and the conference I wanted to go to was MythCon, which is sponsored by the Mythopoeic Society every year. And so I went to my first one, the 44th one, and did something about witches in the wild. So that's how I got into the Mythopoeic Society. And then I just fell down a rabbit hole and just kept going.
Yeah. Well, and now you're their awards administrator. How long have you been doing that?
Yes, actually, we call it a steward. I'm a steward. Yes.
Okay.
We don't have like vice president stewards or a steward in charge of something, which I think is a really teaching at a Quaker college now, it's really a nice thing to think of yourself as a steward of something. You're not an
Sure.
officer. You're just kind of making sure everything goes okay. But it's been really exciting. I love doing it because I get to see all the nominations ahead of time. So that's really
Oh
fun
yeah.
to see that list of books that I can just automatically, you know, put in my wish list, or more likely just buy on my Kindle and spend a ridiculous amount of money. So I've told my son that when I pass away, that's going to be his inheritance. I'm just going to hand him my Kindle because that's
Oh
where all my
man.
money is anyway.
Yeah. You and my wife. My wife does the same thing. Well, that's awesome. That sounds really exciting. Just in just doing this podcast over the last 2 years, the same thing has happened to me. But I'm a physical book lover. You know,
Hmm.
I have quite the extensive library at this point, just from the podcast. So tell me a little bit more about the society itself. So the Mythopoeic Society. Now, when I'm noticing that the first award was given out in 1971, is that around the time that it got started?
It started as this and I wasn't around, but it was, I mean, I was alive, but I wasn't there. It started around, that kind of gives you a hint about how old I am. It started in 1969 with Glenn Goodnight had this idea of having like a Narnia one-day conference. And then the MythCon conference was actually held in Los Angeles the next year in 1970. It's called the Mythopoeic Conference, and it's MythCon for short.
Hmm.
And it continued in Los Angeles, California area for the next few years, and then it started branching out. And so we've had it in many different places. We've had it in um, near Boston. We've had it in Illinois. We've had it in Canada. We've had it in Hawaii. A couple of years for they've combined with Tolkien conferences in Oxford, and
Yep, sure.
had it over in England.
Yep.
So, um, and there's usually a um, guest of honor and a writer of honor. So a scholar guest of honor and an author or artist guest of honor. And we have they've always decided, even from the very beginning, um, they wanted to honor the Inklings, of course, Williams and Lewis and Tolkien, but
Hmm.
also they really wanted to talk about myth making. You know, the books, the scholarship about myth making, also fantasy works that were mainly interested in an idea of myth and this kind of and I mythic essence, I guess you would say, because some books kind of mention myth or they have myth kind of, let's talk about Artemis or something like that, or let's call people Artemis, or, we'll use Greek names or Roman names or Norse names, but they're really not mythic in the idea of, say, like Joseph Campbell would say myth is,
Hmm.
something that's really deeply ingrained in the human psyche. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and so they've always done that, even though the Inklings were all Christians. Myth, the Mythopoeic Society is not trying to push any religion or anything like that. They really want just to kind of explore the ideas of myth and how that works and what it does. So, um, I think that's what has made us grow so much, because we're not limiting ourselves to just a few men, but we're opening it up to all different kinds of um, mythic literature and mythic scholarship.
Sure. Well, one thing I've noticed, it's actually kind of, it was not shocking, but pleasantly surprising, actually. In interacting with some Tolkien fans and scholars over the years, and going to gatherings, it's actually many of the Tolkien fans and the Inkling fans are devoutly either religious or spiritual, depending on how they define it. And it's not something in academia that you see all the time. So it was actually something that was, refreshing.
Yes, it's you don't. I of course I work at a Quaker-based school, so I'm around that maybe more than maybe some other academics are. But I think you'll be surprised at how many academics actually are very interested in having a spiritual side to them. And so I think that, and of course, mythic literature is one way to really get into that.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you've talked a little bit about the society. Now, let's drill back into you mentioned MythCon.
Yes.
So, I mean, in this craziness that is the coronavirus, are you guys planning a MythCon here coming up soon?
We have planned a MythCon for, and usually it's the last week of July or the first week of August, somewhere around then. As of right now, it's still going, but that's really kind of up in the air at this point. We'll probably know by the beginning of May where everything's going to shake down. But it has affected the awards more than anything else. But this year, the one is supposed to be in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So
okay,
MythCon 51, which would be pretty exciting. Yeah.
That is. Did you guys do anything special for MythCon 50?
We just had a lovely time for MythCon 50. It was so fun to see everybody. We had people who had been to the first MythCon there, which was really exciting to get to talk to people who had been there from the very beginning.
Wow.
And seen it. And I saw pictures from back then. The history of how they collected things, what they were studying, what they were looking at. It was just very exciting to see that, I think. So yeah, MythCon 50 was beautiful in San Diego. We had it in San Diego. It was really beautiful.
Well, do you have any plans to come back to the Boston area?
I don't know. That's up to the Mythopeak members who volunteer to hold it in their area. So you have to have somebody who wants to have it in that area. But the one in Boston was also very lovely. So I think we had it. Now I can't remember the college off the top of my head.
There's a few up here.
Yeah, there's just a few over there in that area.
Yeah, exactly.
It's held in a different place every year. So, and usually there's a committee that gets together and we have a call for papers. That's another thing that's a little different about our conference compared to maybe some other fantasy conferences, that they're not just about, TV. And we do have panels on TV shows and on fiction and all that kind of stuff, but we also have very scholarly panels that are really, even if they're about TV shows, they're really very scholarly. And discussing those topics, but also accessible to people who aren't scholars. So
there's something for everybody.
There's something for everybody, and even some people think, oh, I can't possibly like a scholarly paper or going in to see a scholarly talk, but we have many people who really enjoy those who are not scholars, but they just love to come in and listen to people talk about Tolkien or talk about Lewis or talk about Harry Potter or other, fantasy authors. So,
well, I can tell you after perusing two of Verlin Flieger's books that, if your sessions based on those papers are anything like her essays, there's some really interesting things out there that people want to talk about.
Verlin is so wonderful. And so the great thing about MythCon is that it's not a huge conference like, some of the conferences that have 1,000 people. We have maybe a couple of hundred people at the conference. And so you might be able to have lunch with Verlin Flieger because she's there and you're, all eating at the same place. And so you might have, you might get to talk to the guest author or the guest scholar and really get to know them on a personal basis. And that's really kind of exciting. So
That's really exciting. Yeah. Well, tell me, so we've talked a little bit about MythCon, and
mhm.
we had mentioned the awards before, and that's actually what I'm most interested in.
Yes.
So the society does a lot of things. Some of the things we're not even really talking about tonight, but I want to talk about the awards specifically because you mentioned the 4 awards, and let me see if I can get this right. So there's an adult literature award, a
Yes.
children's literature award, a scholarship award for Inkling Studies, which I believe Verlin Flieger is a 4-time winner, and Michael Drought also is
Yes.
a winner of. And there is a general myth and fantasy studies award
Yes.
that Dimitra Fimi has won
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
So tell us, take us through the whole process of the awards cycle and how that works.
Okay. So the award nominations are for that year. So for the awards for this year will be for the year 2019 for the fiction awards. Okay. Our scholarly awards usually go back 3 years, although we are modifying that after this year. I'll explain that a little bit more in just a second. But so books that have been published in the last 3 years have been have the ability to be nominated um, in the scholarly category, and
Okay.
so we get nominations up through um, usually November, December, something like that. Only Mythopoeic Society members can nominate, but any
Wow.
Mythopoeic Society member can nominate for an award.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Um, they cannot nominate themselves. So you can't just join and then nominate a book you wrote. That's not how that works. That has
Okay.
been tried, but that's
Um,
not how that works. Um, and then there are pretty dedicated group of people in the society who um, work on the committees. So there are people who work on the children's committee or the adult committee or the scholarly, and usually the scholarly committees is just the scholars do both the Inkling and the fantasy, but some don't. So, but that's how that works. I mean, and then we look at those nominations, and you have usually until May to come up with the top 5. So we'll have a vote in May where we'll say, what are your top 5? I'll figure that out, and I'll say, here are the top 5, and then we have 3 months to read those top 5. And if you're on the committee, you kind of say, okay, I promise I'll read those top 5. And then vote on the top 5, usually right before MythCon starts. So usually the week of before MythCon is the deadline for that. This year, because all of the libraries are closed, we have extended those deadlines. So um, the top 5 deadline will now be in like August, and then they'll have 2 or 3 months to read, and we'll announce the winners for this year in November. So we have plenty of time to get them read.
right.
Yeah.
Right. That makes sense. So now, am I to assume, so the difference between adult literature and children's literature, obviously I got that, but what is the delineation for the difference between the Inkling studies and the general myth and fantasies
Inkling,
studies? Is
I'm sorry, Inkling studies should be really about the Inklings themselves. So it should have something to do with the Inklings, either Tolkien, Lewis, Williams, and there's some minor Inklings in there. Dorothy Sayre also is often considered an Inkling, so she would be considered in that group as well. Um, and there's a group of about, I think, 8 or 10 people that
Yeah.
fall into that category of the Inklings. And then general fantasy is anything that's not that. So, which is a pretty wide open um, selection. And because of that, because we've had so much more scholarship, and this is something that if you read a lot of scholarly work by people who are writing about fantasy for the first, I don't know, 20 years, every introduction began with an apology in the Christian sense of apologizing for, here I'm writing about fantasy and it really is worth writing about, kind of thing. But in the last 10 years, I would say that doesn't need to be, that's not necessary anymore. We don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to apologize for it. It's truly something that can be studied in a scholarly way. And so many more people are writing about it. So we have changed for next year. We're going to change the scholarly awards to only include those four books that were nominated, that received the top 5, but did not win from the year before, and then books that were published in that year. Am I making sense there? I hope.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's just so many more being published now than used to be, which is, to me, a very exciting thing.
Oh, it's very exciting. Well, let me ask you the same question that I asked Dimitra Fimi, and that was about how Tolkien scholarship has changed. Now, you read a lot, obviously, in this role as a steward, and you're saying there's just more that's coming in. But other than the quantity, how have you noticed scholarship change over the years?
With Tolkien, it's so easy to dig, right? Because he left so much. He left all his drafts. He left all his notes. He left all this, huge amount of material that we can work with. I think people are starting to say, okay, we can look at this from a different perspective than just, maybe new criticism, maybe historicism, any of that kind of thing. We can start looking at this. Let's look at it in terms of, post-colonialism. Let's look at it in terms of gender theory and see what happens and come out with some new things that we haven't seen before.
Sure.
And I think that makes it really interesting. And changes how it looks at, and lately I think I've seen quite a few things about race as well, which I find fascinating, talking about race in fantasy and race in the Inklings as well.
Well, it's where you're seeing this more and more. I don't know if you're on Twitter, but I am seeing a lot of these discussions. I think they're happening outside of just the scholarly community too. There's quite passionate opinions out there on the internets about race, about gender, and this new Amazon show that's coming up. Anytime they hint that a certain actor will play this elf or this Numenorian, there's just Twitter just explodes about why that's accurate or not accurate. In thinking more about our interview coming up, I did come up with a few other questions that I wanted to ask you about, and I thought you might be the perfect person for this question. It is a part of our storyline for our campaign that we did. One of the pivotal characters was Turin Turambar. And of course, such a great influence on him was his mother, Morwen Ledwin. And so I was wondering, you studied the portrayal of old women in sort of the fantastic literature. I was wondering, did you ever get a chance to really study and delve into Morwen's life?
Well, there were some of the more goddess-like characters who have some of those, what I would consider older women characteristics. And one of those is the grieving. Okay. So old women are in charge of death. They're in charge of birth, being there when somebody's born as the midwife, and they're in charge of making sure the body is buried correctly, right? And taken care of and washed at the end. And also they are in charge of mourning. They are the ones who mourn. So I think that's not something we like to think about, as that's not very exciting. She's not throwing lightning bolts or creating great apples or doing anything really fun. She's mourning, but to recognize the passage from one stage of life to the next, right? To the next stage, whatever that is, whatever you believe it to be, is an important thing in almost all cultures. So um, to put an old woman in charge of that to me is very interesting. I find that old women have more power than we like to believe they do. So
Sure. How many older women would you say? And I don't know that we can count elves. I was thinking Galadriel is probably the oldest woman
yes, yes,
in the
she's
story,
old,
but
but she doesn't look old. So
she doesn't look old. Yeah, Kate Blanchett's doing quite well.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, can you think of any other older women other than Morwen?
I think there's a well, um, Lobelia Sackville Baggins.
Oh yeah, well, I suppose.
Yes, it's one of the few that I can think of, which is, um, she's got that kind of old woman stereotype. She's greedy, she's naggy, but in the end, she's also kind of heroic, right? So I don't know. There's just, but there's not very many old women, no,
Right,
in
right.
in Tolkien,
And,
or in Lewis either, for that matter. So that I can
well,
remember anyway.
the character that I really wanted to ask you about, but there's just nothing on. And I bring her up because the characters in my story are about to meet her. Is Queen Beruthiel?
Oh,
Um, did she ever interest you? Just the faintest mentioning of the cats of Queen Beruthiel.
yeah. So is she definitely old because she has a bunch of cats? That's
Oh gosh, now I'm stereotyping women. That's great. Thank you. Now I'm in trouble. It was not the cats that interest me. It was the whole persona of Queen Beruthiel.
oh,
Just and how everyone seemed to know her
yes,
without there being a mention.
yeah, yeah.
So
It doesn't have to be like, yeah. You just you know that has happened. When you read like the Iliad and the Odyssey, and he's listing names in there, and you're realizing as you're reading it, and you read it over and over again. You read it and you realize, oh, all the Greeks knew who all these people were he was talking about. We just don't know them because we
right.
lost those stories, right? We don't know what that story would be. So yeah, I don't know what all her cats would be, what she would, but always she's not mentioned without the cats. She's,
Right.
the cats go with her, so something important has happened with those cats.
The first cat lady
Yes.
of literature. Oh, jeez. Oh boy. All right. Well, let me. So I have one other question. I just was curious. I've been trying to find out about this. So I read somewhere. I think it was Wikipedia, and you can believe everything you read on
Oh yeah,
Wikipedia.
that's what I teach my students. Yes.
That's what I teach my students as well too. So I read somewhere that the Inklings were reestablished as a student group in 2006 in Oxford. Do you know anything about this?
No idea. No, really.
Okay.
Who would
Yes.
they be? And are they
Well,
meeting at the Baby and the Bird? Are they meeting
they-
at the
well,
pub?
well, I've contacted the university several times and I've not been able to find out any information about this. So I guess now is the time where I would ask my listeners if you have any information about the student group, or perhaps the faculty have taken it over again. About the reestablished Inklings. Please drop me a line and let me know. And if you hear anything of it, Dr.
Okay,
Ronn, please,
I've not heard
let me know.
anything. I would like to say one thing, that if of those people who are kind of, you're stuck at home right now, if you want to find some good reading, you want to get away to another world, go to misssock.org and look up the awards for the fiction, and you will find plenty, both for yourself and your children, to read. And then, of course, check out the scholarly work too, because it's great.
Well, so other than the reading, are you guys looking for people to get involved with the society? Is it
Oh,
easy to become
always, yeah. We have several hundred members, and from I think it's 17 different countries the last time I checked. But yes, we'd love people to get involved in it and come and join if you want to be. We do the awards. work almost all online. So, and we have people from all over the country who read the books and comment to each other. We have a group where they talk to each other about what they found and did they find it mythopoeic enough or not. That's really fascinating. And it's just a great group, I think. If you can go to a MythCon, you will enjoy it. I've never heard anybody say, "Oh, I really hated going to that." No, they always love it. So, and I started going, and I just can't stop. So that's for me. Something that it's my way of showing the things I'm interested in a scholarly way. And they've always welcomed, and I have some pretty out there things. So my next one, I think, is going to be on Louis Cha's Legends of the Condor Heroes, which is supposed to be the Chinese Lord of the Rings, which is just being translated into English. And so that's my next kind of, oh, that sounds fascinating. So that's what I decided I would work on.
Well, I will put the link to the Society and to MythCon.
That would be great.
And to the book that you just mentioned. I think it's important to pass these things on to the listeners, just for reference. And I really hope that whatever you guys decide to do with MythCon, that MythCon 51 is both fun and successful.
Thank you. Well, we'll have MythCon 51. We'll just have to see when we're going to have it. So,
got it. Well, Dr. Ronn, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Though this marks the end of the episode, the road goes ever on. Until next time, join us at longwinded.one and consider giving us a review on Apple Music, Spotify, or really whichever platform you choose.